I reflected a lot to prepare this discussion, because there are several factors that can be associated with the failure of a compliance program. And statistically, it's very, very difficult to have an analysis which is rigorous. But during the last weeks, also because I'm writing a book about compliance problems, I identified 5 main categories of failures. The first concern all the failures associated with the so-called cosmetic compliance. As you know, cosmetic compliance are those situations in which the company perceives to be forced to adopt a compliance program, and what essentially does is to do the minimum to appear compliant. Okay, in such case, such strategies determine a failure. In the worst of the situation, in the best of the situation, the compliance program does nothing. Which means that the company is exposed to any kind of risk. In the worst of the situation, when a company implements a cosmetic compliance model, which means essentially nothing, everything is appearance, or mostly it's appearance, the company is sending to its employees, but also critical stakeholders, a bad message: we don't care. Okay, so paradoxically, cosmetic compliance can be a way to activate, facilitate, motivate for illegal activities. The second category of compliance failures can be associated, and I had several experiences on this, when we are dealing with risk maps which are incomplete. So the company does not, the compliance system and the company overall does not identify some potential risks. It is exposed to them, and the system is incapable to prevent and sometimes even to identify. Okay, this happens when technologies are new, the socioeconomic environment is changing. There are the company starts diversifying geographically, or diversifying in terms of sectors. So the exposure to risks became much more complex, etc., etc. The third category of failures is associated with the detection. There is an illegal activity, there is something suspicious, but the organization is not structured to detect it. And this happens because the company might have problems in the risk map, it might have problems in the red flag list, it might have problem in the triangulation in data triangulation and in normal controls. I keep repeating this. I already mentioned last year, and I keep repeating this all over the world. The new techniques, instead of speaking about artificial intelligence in a too sophisticated way, let me say very simply, the combination of financial and not financial data is a very, very powerful approach, okay, to detect failure. Please don't forget the case of Pescanova. Pescanova had a very, very serious financial fraud misreport problem almost 10 years ago. They had the financial performances going down, up dramatically, and they had the productivity indicators going down in terms of efficiency and in terms of production. This is a typical case in which a junior analyst would immediately spot the problem. Okay. Fourth categories of failures are the investigative activities. I don't know how many times the last 20 years I was called after some people have done mistakes. Typical mistake is that there are some doubts about potential problematic activities in a company, and the internal department starts doing investigation and doing mistakes, which is doing a search in a computer without notifying the employee, doing the search in the computer without using the necessary filters that are imposed by privacy laws, etc., etc. So this is happening very, very often, and unfortunately, these things are discovered when you are in court, in criminal court, in civil court, in labor court. Okay, and this is happening much more often than what we imagine for two reasons. First, sometimes companies feel the pressure to not disclose. They don't want to disclose outside. They don't want to involve. They don't want to tell their lawyers, their legal advisors, because they're scared. And of course, they don't want to involve forensic investigators. So they try to do things by themselves. And the typical other mistake is that you try to pop up money to reduce your costs of the investigation, and you don't get professionals. Let me tell you, I started working on these issues essentially in 2001, when the Italian legislation of compliance was published. So it's 20 years I'm working on this. The level of complexity is increasing dramatically. And the last category of failures are those which is the most important, are the failures related to failures in the culture. The most important thing, let me repeat, the most important thing is organizational culture. The technicalities are less important than creating a strong, ethically oriented culture. And we have 20 years of research and professional practice that confirm this. Federico, what do you think about my very brief lecture?
Thank you, Nino. I hope that you can hear me
perfectly.
Good. The experience here in South Europe and in Italy in particular is similar to what you have described. And I would add just 3 quick points. One point concerns the fact that over the last 10 years, all the businesses that grew here grew internationally because local markets have been relatively low. This means that one issue for many companies is to have a compliance program which should cover operations in more than one country. Some companies are aware of the relevant statutes in different countries. Others try to extend simply the compliance program of the holding company to all the operation internationally. And this can be a downside because, as you have said, different countries can have different regulation. So one issue that we can add to the general picture that you did is that now the international landscape of compliance varied substantially. And so you have to adapt the compliance program of the holding company to the different statute of the different countries. Point number 2 is that quite often compliance officers have to cover many countries. So their attention is put on different realities that compete for time and resources. So to have a balanced attention and balanced resources of the compliance officer to the different countries he or she is in charge of is an important factor. Point number 3 is that overall the attention and resources put on compliance program, according to the experience of South Europe and Italy, increased, or at least over the last 5 years. So I would say that things are going in the right direction. The best compliance officer at local level have been promoted at a regional or even a global level. Young people, young colleagues like the idea of working in compliance. In the past, it was not like this, and there are opportunities. So I believe that if we are going to make this conversation 3 years from now or 5 years from now, the landscape will be changed for the best. Back to you, Nino.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Do you see some trends in relation to the compliance failures over time? So let me tell you what is my experience. The problem of cosmetic compliance generally emerges at the beginning when there is a shift in the legislation. So I did not experience this in Italy because I was studying in the US, but I'm experiencing here in Spain. The compliance legislation in Spain arrived 14 years after Italy. And in this moment, I see a clear bifurcation. On one side, companies that are taking this very seriously, and other companies that are taking this very, very superficially. And they are just trying to get the minimum necessary to keep forward.
It is a good question. And our experience in Italy and South Europe is the following, that typically you need 10 to 15 years after the relevant statute introducing liability of companies for a crime committed by individuals for the local legal market to really have traction on a compliance program. Plus, it is important how many cases are brought to prosecution by the authorities. For example, Italy is a country in which investigations are always in the pipelines, and especially the biggest public prosecutor offices bring companies and not only individuals routinely to trial. This encourages the landscape to evolve and companies to invest in human resources and services in order to build and enforce and strengthen compliance program. So I believe that even if, as you said, some countries started in the early years 2000, for example, Italy, but also other countries like Germany have a long-standing experience of companies under trial and also compliance program to be built and strengthened. The other countries with the relevant statutes already approved will follow suit in a few years. Back to you.
Thanks. Another question. In your experience, how is important the capability of the compliance manager to successfully involve all critical resources and functions in the compliance activity? What I mean, I suspect, but I don't have statistics. I have just my experience, which has no statistical power and value. So in my experience, the significant mistakes in the compliance programs were related to the fact that, for example, engineers were not involved. As you know, I worked for an electricity company, several electricity companies in the past, and I noticed that some compliance, the risk map, for example, was not to take into consideration significant risks that were technologically specific. So according to your experience, is how much the capability to engage all critical professionalities in the compliance effort is relevant to have such compliance program successful? And have you ever experienced situations in which the compliance program was not successful because someone who knew was not engaged in the compliance activity?